Hey there, folks. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an approval workflow to manage the approval process of event requests for your institution. We're going to start by making a conference approval workflow. We'll call it conference approval. Now, if you click into that workflow, you'll be taken to the interface in which you can customize your own workflows. You'll see across the top bar here, we have some options. Graph and history are two different views that you can use to see your workflow in different ways. Graph shows you the actual steps of your workflow, and history shows you any requests that have been through this workflow. Adding steps is how you create different steps in the workflow process for different users to approve different parts of the event. And then finally, you can edit the workflow, change the name, enter a description, or exempt roles from the workflow. And you can also delete there. This alerts tab is something that you'll want to be keeping your eye on as you're making your workflows. It'll basically just keep you updated with any errors or missing steps in your creation process. So as you see in this interface, we have two steps currently created, your author step and your approve step. Think of this as the beginning and the end of your workflow process. This is what happens when the event is requested, and the approve step is the final step in which your event is approved and added to your events calendar. Now, what we're going to try and do is create some steps in between to manage the event approval process. In order to do that, we can add a new step here. Now, let's say for this step, we want administration's approval. So we'll call it admin approval. You can add participants. We'll add Frank, who's part of administration, and also Quentin. And you'll see the 5 different options that participants have when they're interacting with this approval. They can vote, comment, edit requests, edit the workflow, and also force approve event requests. Now, for now, we're going to leave them on can vote and can comment. Now, once an event request reaches a stage in the workflow, all of the participants will be notified via email, and you can actually customize this template here. Now, down below, we set the requirements for approval and rejection. Since we have 2 participants here, but they're both administration, we'll say we only need 1 vote required for approval and 1 vote required for rejection. Now, this step, you can actually decide what happens if the request is rejected at this step. And we'll say we want to return the request to its author so they can make changes if they need to. Finally, you can decide whether or not this step has a deadline. For example, we can say these participants have 7 days to make a decision, or it will return to the author. Logic jumps help decide what happens after this step is approved. And right now, the only option is to approve the event. So we'll go ahead and add that. Now, to connect author to admin approval, we're going to edit author. Default next step is admin approval. So now you can see that in order for event to be approved, it first has to go through admin approval. Now I want to show you how dynamic steps work. Let's say once an admin approves an event, we still need to check whether or not the room is actually available for the event. So we can add a dynamic step, which is designed for either room or resource approvals. And how these work is that they're actually generated based on the specific room that is listed in the event request form. And I'll show you how that works in a second. So in order to get rooms in between admin and approved, we just edit the default next steps. And now you see that admin approval goes to room approvals, which then approves the event. So like I said, room approvals are dynamically generated. And for an example of this, we'll check out room GH136. Now let's say on my event request form, I list this room. I want this room for my event. If I actually go into room settings and click on workflow settings, I can see the workflow settings that occur when this room is listed as my event. It needs to be approved by Ryan. Maybe he's the owner of this room. And it only requires 1 vote. And it has the same options for deadlines as the other workflow settings that we saw earlier. So let's head back into our workflow. So now we can see that room approvals are actually generated in the room settings. And so you can edit those on a room by room basis without having to create a super complicated workflow. Now, one last thing I want to show is conditional statements. Right now, we have a pretty linear approval workflow. It goes step by step, no matter what the event is. But let's say there are certain organizations, groups, whatever, that we want to have a little bit more of a custom workflow. The way that we can do that is we can add logic jumps that have conditions. So, for example, let's say that Coursedog wants to have an event, and our administration already knows that Coursedog is allowed to have events as long as the room is available. So we want to skip directly to room approvals and not have to worry about the admin responding to the request. We can say the event as the field group, organization as the field name, and we want to say the requirement is Coursedog. So you'll see that if the event organization is Coursedog, then we want to jump straight to room approvals. And the default next step is what happens in any other case. So any other organization that is not Coursedog will be taken to admin approval. Now, when we save this, you'll see that we now have different paths for the event approval process, depending on what the organization is. And you can get really custom with this. So I recommend diving in here and just messing around with different conditional statements and different paths. But that's about it. We have now just created an approval workflow for conference events that changes paths based on the organization. And once it reaches the approved process, you'll see it in your Coursedog events calendar. Thanks for watching.